The prison yard was alive with noise, the clanging of metal gates, the shuffle of worn sneakers across concrete, the low murmur of inmates talking, laughing, sometimes arguing. It was just another ordinary day for most of the men locked behind these walls. But for one man, today would become unforgettable. No one noticed him at first. Not the guards patrolling lazily along the fence, not the groups of inmates huddled around card games or basketballs. He wasn't imposing or loud. He didn't shout or show off. He simply sat in the shade, eyes calm, body relaxed, observing everything. That man was Steven Seagal. A quiet presence that seemed almost invisible, but for those who paid attention, there was something about him that suggested he was far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Then he arrived, the so-called strongman of the yard. A mountain of a man, chest puffed, muscles bulging beneath a tight shirt, a swagger that demanded attention. He had built his reputation on fear, on brute strength, on the idea that no one in this yard could challenge him. And today, he decided to test his limits. He spotted Steven sitting quietly. A smirk spread across his face, a mix of arrogance and amusement. In his mind, here was another easy target. Someone small, calm, and unsuspecting. He strutted over, laughter bouncing off the walls, every step a challenge. The other inmates noticed too. Some nudged their friends, whispering bets, eager to see how this would unfold. Others looked away, sensing trouble, hoping they wouldn't be caught in the chaos. The strongman stopped in front of Steven and leaned in, voice loud, full of contempt. "What, you think you're tough?" A challenge thrown casually, but loaded with threat. Around them, conversation paused. Even the guards, distracted elsewhere, felt the shift in energy. Steven didn't flinch. He didn't move. He simply looked up slowly, meeting the man's eyes with calm focus. No fear. No anger. Just the stillness of a man who knew exactly what he was capable of, and exactly what he would do if provoked. In that moment, the yard held its collective breath. Everyone sensed it, the moment when the ordinary turned dangerous, when a simple act of disrespect could trigger a chain reaction nobody would forget. And for the strongman, the mistake was already made. He had picked the wrong inmate. Engagement prompt. Have you ever seen someone completely underestimate another, and instantly regret it? The prison yard was deceptively ordinary. The morning sunlight beat down on the cracked concrete, illuminating the chain-link fences, the rusted gates, and the worn benches scattered around. The sound of metal clanging against metal echoed in the distance as a guard lazily swung a set of keys at his belt. Inmates moved about their daily routines, some stretching and jogging, others talking in small groups, sharing jokes, cards, or gossip. To anyone looking from above, it seemed calm, almost mundane. But in reality, danger was always just a heartbeat away. Steven Seagal sat quietly in a shaded corner, leaning against the wall. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but his eyes were alert, scanning the yard without appearing to do so. He wasn't looking for trouble, nor was he trying to make a statement. He was simply observing the rhythm of the prison, the way the guards moved, the way the men reacted to each other. There was a discipline in his calm that most didn't notice, a subtle command of presence that didn't demand attention but naturally drew it. Around him, life went on as usual. Groups of inmates stood near the basketball court, shouting over each other with exaggerated stories. A few men sat cross-legged on the benches, passing around contraband cigarettes, their laughter cutting through the air. The strongman of the yard, a mountain of a man with a reputation built on intimidation, patrolled like a king among subjects. His leather jacket creaked as he walked, muscles flexing with each step. Other inmates whispered, some daring him silently, some keeping their distance. They all knew his reputation, bullying weaker inmates, flexing strength for respect, and making everyone else uneasy. The yard was full of ordinary chaos, the kind that makes people forget they're in a prison. Guards were present, but their eyes were often elsewhere, checking paperwork, watching other inmates, or conversing amongst themselves. The daily routine created a false sense of security. For most men, it was easy to assume that nothing dramatic would happen. The strongman, however, thrived on that assumption. He liked to provoke, to test limits when everyone was distracted, when people felt safe. Steven, meanwhile, was almost invisible in this noise. A man might pass a dozen times without noticing him. But that quietness was part of his power. There was no posturing, no shouting. He didn't need to prove himself. His calm was a shield, a warning, and a promise all at once. The other men could feel it in the air, even if they couldn't explain why. The strongman, unaware, or perhaps ignoring, the subtle tension Stephen's presence created, strutted toward him. His grin was wide, almost childish, filled with confidence. Every step he took seemed to scream, "I am bigger. I am stronger. No one can touch me." Around them, some inmates turned to watch, sensing a confrontation might be brewing. Others tried to ignore it, continuing their games or conversations, hoping it wouldn't erupt into violence. The yard, filled with noise, laughter, and ordinary movement, was a perfect stage for something extraordinary to happen. It was that calm, that everyday normalcy, that made the upcoming conflict so shocking. When people witness chaos in a place that feels safe, it grabs attention, sticks in memory, and spreads rapidly. In prisons, moments like this are especially dangerous, because no one expects the quiet ones, the observant ones, to act. And Stephen? He wasn't just observing. He was calculating. Watching. Feeling the shift in energy as the strongman approached. His body remained relaxed, but his mind was focused, measuring distance, weight, timing, and potential outcomes. He didn't need to move yet. The strongman was already revealing himself with arrogance and aggression. To anyone unfamiliar with martial mastery, Steven Seagal sitting there might have seemed like an ordinary inmate, quiet, small, almost fragile in comparison to the strongman looming over him. But everyone watching closely would soon see that appearances are deceiving. Calm is not weakness. Silence is not submission. And in a moment, the ordinary prison yard would transform into a stage for a lesson in real power. Why this matters? Moments like this are deceptive. Most confrontations don't start with chaos or shouting. They start in ordinary routines, in ordinary places, when everyone believes they are safe. And the person who appears calm, small, or unassuming may hold the power to change everything in a single instant. The yard had seemed calm, ordinary, filled with the usual noise and distraction, but in that ordinary rhythm, tension had begun to creep in unnoticed. The strongman of the prison, a towering figure built more on intimidation than strategy, had set his sights on Steven Seagal. He had spotted him earlier, quiet and unassuming in the corner, and in that moment, a plan had formed in his mind, a plan fueled by ego, arrogance, and a need to assert dominance. He approached with a swagger that spoke volumes. Each step made a low thud on the concrete, announcing his presence to everyone nearby. The other inmates noticed immediately. Some chuckled quietly, betting on how the encounter would go, while others instinctively shifted away, uneasy. The guards were distracted, giving the strongman an invisible green light to make his move. The yard was alive with ordinary chaos, but all that was about to change in the blink of an eye. The strongman stopped directly in front of Stephen, a grin splitting his face. His eyes glinted with mischief and challenge. He leaned slightly forward, projecting his voice just enough for those near them to hear, but loud enough to command attention. "What, you think you're tough?" he sneered. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge, a provocation, a declaration meant to humiliate. Around them, chatter paused. Inmates froze mid-laugh, mid-step, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Even the guards glanced over, instinctively aware that the balance of power in the yard had shifted, even if they didn't fully understand how. Steven Seagal didn't flinch. He didn't stand or raise his voice. He didn't even shift his posture. He simply lifted his gaze, slowly, deliberately, meeting the strongman's eyes. There was no fear there. No panic. Only calm. Focused. Unwavering. Eyes that measured, calculated, and understood the exact consequences of every movement, every action, every reaction. The quiet intensity was almost visible, a tension that radiated outward, unspoken yet impossible to ignore. The strongman, however, mistook the calm for weakness. His grin widened. He leaned closer, his arrogance spilling over. "You're small, weak," he said. "I bet you couldn't last 5 seconds if I wanted to show you who's boss." Laughter rippled from the nearby inmates. Some nodded in agreement. Others, more cautious, avoided eye contact, unsure whether to step in or stay back. The strongman's words were deliberate, cruel, designed to provoke and embarrass. He thrived on these moments, the subtle thrill of asserting dominance over someone who seemed incapable of resisting. Steven Seagal remained still, a picture of controlled patience. His silence wasn't submission, it was strategy. Every second he didn't react increased the strongman's overconfidence. Every moment he waited allowed the tension in the yard to build, creating a pressure that would soon explode. The air itself seemed heavier, charged, almost electric with anticipation. Then the strongman stepped even closer, violating personal space, his chest pressing forward. "Come on," he taunted. "Say something, little man. Show me what you've got." A hush fell over the yard. Phones were raised, some inmates quietly recording the brewing confrontation. The guards, still not fully focused, instinctively moved closer, but even they could sense that this wasn't just a fight for dominance. It was about power, control, and the subtle art of fear. Steven's expression didn't change. His eyes remained fixed, unshaken, studying the strongman as though he were nothing more than a chess piece moving predictably across the board. And that was exactly what the strongman had failed to understand. This wasn't a typical inmate. This wasn't a brawl waiting to happen. This was a man who had mastered control, discipline, and precision over decades of martial expertise. The strongman, sensing doubt in the briefest flicker of hesitation in Steven's eyes, though Steven's calm betrayed nothing, smirked. He doubled down. Another insult. Louder. Meaner. Designed to humiliate and dominate in front of the crowd. "You think you can just sit there and stare at me?" he barked. "You don't know who you're messing with." For a moment, a ripple of tension passed through the yard. Some inmates shifted uneasily. Some stepped back instinctively. The strongman, however, felt invincible. The energy of the crowd fed his arrogance. The quiet man in front of him? He was certain he could break him with words, intimidation, or brute force. But Steven Seagal didn't react. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply remained calm, steady, a living embodiment of patience and quiet power. And that calm, more than anything else, was what began to unnerve the strongman. The air changed. The laughter that had accompanied the insults faded. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The tension became almost tangible, like the moment before a storm breaks. Everyone in the yard could feel it. The strongman had crossed a line. He had picked the wrong inmate to provoke, and even if he didn't realize it yet, the consequences were about to arrive, swiftly, decisively, and without warning. Have you ever watched someone push the wrong person, not realizing the quietest, calmest one is the most dangerous? The yard was silent now, but the silence was heavy, charged with anticipation. Every man in the vicinity could feel it, the subtle shift in the energy, like the calm before a storm. Steven Seagal sat, then slowly rose to his feet, not hurriedly, not aggressively, but with deliberate control. Every motion was measured, precise, calculated. He had all the power in that yard. Years of discipline, years of training, and years of experience were in his body, coiled like a spring ready to release. Every muscle knew its purpose. Every nerve was attuned to the danger in front of him. He could end the strongman in a heartbeat. He could throw him down, disable him, humiliate him in front of the entire yard, and none would dare question it. But that wasn't the point. This wasn't about proving dominance. This wasn't about ego. This was about control, about strategy, about demonstrating that true strength is not in rage or reckless violence. It is in knowing exactly when to act and acting with precision. Steven placed his hand subtly over the small of his back, adjusting his balance, preparing, observing. His mind raced faster than any eye could follow, calculating the man's weight, his reach, his probable attack angles. The strongman's arrogance made him predictable, too predictable. But even so, Steven didn't rush. He allowed the moment to breathe. Engagement question. Have you ever been in a situation where you could fight, or stay calm, and the choice you made would define everything? What would you have done? The strongman stepped closer again, his chest puffed, his voice dripping with condescension. "I can take you down in seconds," he growled, leaning into Steven's personal space. Around them, the other inmates held their breath, sensing that the moment was about to erupt into violence. Phones were raised, whispers spread, and even the guards instinctively moved closer, though they hadn't yet realized how dangerous this was. Steven's gaze didn't waver. His expression was calm, almost unreadable. No anger, no panic. Just stillness, the kind that unsettles even the bravest of men. Every moment the strongman tried to provoke him, Stephen absorbed it, turning the insults, the gestures, the arrogance into tension he could control. Engagement question. Have you ever met someone so calm in the face of intimidation that it made the aggressor uncomfortable? How did it make you feel watching it? The strongman shoved at him lightly, more a test than an attack. A typical inmate might have lunged or shouted, escalating the situation. But Stephen, he didn't react immediately. He simply shifted, adjusting his stance, ready, balanced, and entirely in control. The shove had no effect except to reveal the strongman's intent and predictability. Stephen could feel every heartbeat of the man in front of him. He could read the arrogance, the overconfidence, the tiny flickers of doubt masked beneath pride. He didn't need to move yet. The strongman was already making the mistakes for him. And then came the moment every silent observer had been waiting for. The strongman took one step too close, a slight miscalculation in balance, overreaching to assert dominance. Stephen's decision crystallized in that instant, not to strike out of rage, but to act decisively, to demonstrate that control is the ultimate power. Before any other inmate could react, before anyone could intervene, Stephen's hand subtly shifted, redirecting the strongman's forward momentum. The movement was nearly imperceptible, elegant in its precision, yet devastating in effect. One slight adjustment in the man's center of gravity, and the arrogance that had filled the yard moments ago began to crumble. Engagement question. If you were watching, would you have noticed the subtle shift that changed everything? Or would you have been waiting for a violent explosion that never came? Even as the strongman stumbled slightly, trying to regain his balance, Stephen remained calm, composed, and utterly unshaken. He could have ended it entirely, crippled the man, humiliated him, or sent him sprawling to the concrete. But he didn't. Control, not chaos, was the lesson he intended to teach. Around them, the yard was frozen. Every eye followed the slow, deliberate movements. Every breath held. Every man in that space understood, without a word spoken, that the quiet inmate had the power to end it all, but chose discipline instead. Engagement question. Have you ever seen someone act with such calculated restraint that it completely changed the way everyone in the room perceived them? What does that teach you about strength? This was the inner conflict, the critical moment before action. Steven Seagal had the opportunity to react with sheer force, but he chose control, patience, and strategy. And in that choice, he demonstrated something rare in a place built on violence. True strength is knowing how and when to act, and understanding that discipline is more powerful than rage. The strongman, unaware of how close he had come to being completely humbled, was already beginning to sense that he had miscalculated. Pride, arrogance, and ego had led him here, but it was Stephen's calm, his patience, and his mastery of control that would define what happened next. Final engagement question for Part 4. If you were in the strongman's shoes, or even watching, what would you have done in that moment? Step back, fight, or freeze? And what does that reveal about your own sense of control in tense situations? The moment of decision had passed. Steven Seagal's calm had unnerved the strongman, but arrogance and pride were a dangerous combination. The man still believed strength meant winning through intimidation, through sheer size and force. And now, fueled by ego, he stepped closer, this time, no longer testing, but challenging. "Think you're better than me," he barked, chest puffed, muscles taut, veins bulging. "Come on, show me what you've got." The yard went silent. Every inmate froze, every eye locked on the unfolding drama. Phones were raised, whispers turned into stifled gasps, and the guards instinctively moved closer, unsure how to intervene without escalating the situation themselves. Stephen remained motionless for a heartbeat longer than anyone expected. Then, ever so slowly, he shifted his stance, settling his weight evenly, ready for whatever came next. His calm was unnerving. There was no rage, no flinch, no anticipation of fear, just complete mastery of himself and the moment. Engagement question. Have you ever watched someone so in control that it made the aggressor hesitate? How does that change the energy in a room? The strongman lunged. A shove, a grab, an attempt to intimidate by physical force. But Stephen was prepared. In one fluid motion, he sidestepped slightly, redirecting the strongman's momentum, and at the same time, a subtle twist of his wrist destabilized the man's balance. It was not violent. It wasn't about hurting the strongman. It was about control, precision, and teaching a lesson that brute force alone could never convey. The strongman stumbled. Surprise flashed across his face. Pride turned into confusion. The onlookers' whispers grew louder. Phones recorded every subtle movement. And yet, Stephen did nothing more. He didn't strike. He didn't shout. He simply stood, steady and calm, forcing the strongman to adjust to the lesson he was receiving, without ever being hit. But the strongman wasn't finished. Fueled by humiliation, he recovered quickly and attempted another aggressive shove, aiming to regain dominance. His friends at the edges of the yard murmured encouragement, some laughing, others nervously sensing what was about to unfold. This time, Stephen's response was even more precise. A slight shift of his weight, a minimal pivot, and the strongman's hand collided with empty space, his own momentum carrying him forward into a stumble. His face showed shock, disbelief, and anger all at once. Engagement question. If you were in the yard witnessing this, would you be cheering for the quiet underdog, or stunned into silence?
Why?
The crowd could feel the shift. The man who had thought himself untouchable now realized that physical strength was useless against mastery of balance, control, and timing. Every step, every reaction, every subtle movement Stephen made demonstrated that rage and size were no match for calm precision. The strongman tried again. He raised a fist this time, fueled by frustration, ready to make a final show of force. In the blink of an eye, Stephen anticipated the motion. With a smooth, controlled movement, he guided the strongman's arm to the side, breaking his balance once more. The man stumbled backward, his friends rushing forward to steady him, while the other inmates watched, stunned into silence. Stephen didn't chase him. He didn't mock him. He didn't celebrate. He simply remained standing, calm, unshaken, his breathing steady, his posture perfect. He had already won without striking a single devastating blow. Engagement question. What would you have done if you were the strongman? Would anger have taken over, or would you have paused and realized you were being outmatched without knowing it? The yard, once filled with noise and casual chaos, now held only the sound of heavy breathing, murmured astonishment, and the subtle scuff of concrete under shoes as the strongman was guided away by his peers. Even the guards, who had watched countless fights erupt in this yard, felt the weight of what had just occurred. They had seen the power of skill, control, and discipline, a power that dwarfed raw aggression. Stephen remained motionless for a moment longer, scanning the yard, his gaze calm but watchful. No one moved toward him. No one dared challenge the quiet master who had demonstrated that day the difference between strength and control, between arrogance and mastery, between chaos and order. Final engagement prompt for Part 5. If you were standing there, witnessing someone stop a bully without striking him aggressively, how would you react? Would it inspire you, scare you, or make you rethink what strength really means? In that moment, one simple truth became clear. Real power is not measured by the loudest shout or the biggest muscles. Real power is mastery over oneself, the ability to control not just the opponent, but the situation itself. And the lesson the inmates learned, silently but profoundly, was one they would never forget. The strongman's arrogance had carried him this far, but now the full weight of reality began to settle in. Each stumble, each failed shove, each moment of humiliation stripped him of the bravado he had relied on for years. Around him, the yard was silent. Every inmate, every guard, every observer fully aware that something extraordinary was unfolding. Stephen Seagal didn't move quickly, didn't shout, didn't react with anger. He remained perfectly balanced, calm, almost statuesque, radiating quiet authority. The air itself seemed to bend around him, charged with tension, respect, and fear. Every muscle, every breath, every tiny movement conveyed mastery, and everyone watching could feel it without needing words. Engagement question. Have you ever witnessed someone so composed under pressure that it felt almost impossible to breathe normally around them? How did it make you feel? The strongman, humiliated and confused, attempted to assert control one last time. He raised his fist, aiming for a dramatic display, hoping that a show of force might reclaim some of his crumbling dominance. But Stephen's eyes, focused and unshaken, never left him. In one fluid motion, so subtle that many watching could barely follow, Stephen guided the strongman's raised arm to the side, redirecting the force and breaking his balance completely. The man stumbled backward, teetering on the edge of falling, his friends rushing forward instinctively to steady him. But even as they did, the power dynamic had shifted irreversibly. The strongman's pride, the arrogance that had once commanded fear, was gone. He was exposed, outmatched not by rage, not by brute force, but by precision, calm, and absolute control. Engagement question. If you were the strongman, what would have gone through your mind in that moment? Panic, shame, or realization? And what does that reveal about your own reactions to confrontation? Stephen remained still, eyes locked on the man who had dared challenge him. His stance was relaxed, but there was a quiet tension in his posture that communicated an unspoken warning. You are outmatched, and there is still time to walk away. The lesson was clear. No harm had been done physically, yet the strongman was completely humbled. The yard understood. The fight had been won before a single devastating strike was delivered. Around them, the inmates whispered to each other, awe and fear mixing in equal measure. Phones recorded every second, capturing the incredible display of authority and restraint. Even the guards, who had witnessed countless altercations in this yard, felt the weight of what had occurred. They had not seen a fight, they had seen a masterclass in control, timing, and psychological dominance. The strongman tried one more time to recover his pride. He straightened, fists clenched, and looked directly at Stephen, hoping for a reaction. But Stephen's gaze didn't waver. Calm, steady, unshakable. The quiet authority of the man before him left no room for further aggression. Stephen spoke, his voice low but perfectly audible across the yard. You still have time. Walk away. Leave this alone. It doesn't need to end badly. Engagement question. How would you respond if someone said that to you after you had been trying to dominate them? Would you fight, argue, or finally recognize the truth? The strongman hesitated, pride and ego warring with the stark reality before him. His friends, sensing the futility, held him back, pulling him toward safety. For the first time, the strongman realized that raw strength meant nothing against precision, control, and discipline. He stumbled backward, utterly humbled, as the yard absorbed the lesson silently but profoundly. Stephen remained in his place, composed, breathing steady, muscles relaxed but ready. He had proven, without violence, that power is not the loudest punch or the biggest muscle, it is mastery over oneself, over the situation, and over the opponent. The yard slowly returned to life, but it was different now. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. Laughter returned more cautiously. Phones recorded and replayed the scene in quiet loops. The lesson was embedded. The strongest person in the room is not the loudest or the biggest. The strongest is the one who protects, who controls, and who acts with discipline. Stephen finally relaxed slightly, stepping back, scanning the yard one last time. Every eye remained on him for a few moments longer, respect radiating silently from every direction. No one would forget the events of that day, not because of violence, but because of the absolute mastery displayed in a place where violence had seemed inevitable. Final engagement question for Part 6. If you were in the yard witnessing this, would it inspire you to reconsider how you handle conflicts in your own life? Could calm, control, and patience ever be more powerful than aggression? Comment below, what would you do if faced with a challenge like this? And in that controlled climax, the lesson was clear. Strength is not measured by force. Strength is measured by restraint, precision, and the ability to remain calm when everyone else expects chaos. In that yard, Steven Seagal had demonstrated something unforgettable. Real authority doesn't scream. It commands. Have you ever seen someone stop a fight without striking, yet leave everyone in awe? What did that teach you about power? The strongman's pride had been shattered. His friends guided him away, murmuring excuses, trying to restore what little dignity he had left. The yard slowly began to return to its usual rhythm, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every inmate, every guard, every observer knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Not a fight, but a lesson in true strength. Steven Seagal remained standing, calm and composed, the air around him almost tangible with authority. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. There was no adrenaline-fueled display of victory. His presence alone was the statement, and it spoke louder than any shout or punch ever could. The lesson was simple, yet profound. The strongest person in the room is not the loudest. Not the biggest. Not the one who lashes out in anger. True strength lies in discipline, in control, in knowing how to act, and when not to. Engagement question. If you were in the yard, watching this unfold, what would you remember most? The strength of the man who stumbled, or the calm of the one who didn't need to strike to win? For the inmates who witnessed it, the impact was immediate and lasting. Whispers spread from corner to corner, recounting the quiet mastery they had just observed. Phones captured snippets of the encounter, and within minutes, the story began circulating, first in the prison, then beyond its walls. The lesson was viral before anyone even realized it. Power without control is dangerous, but control without aggression is unforgettable. The guards, too, felt it. They had seen countless fights in that yard, witnessed countless attempts at intimidation. But they had rarely, if ever, seen authority demonstrated so calmly and effectively. Seagal had transformed what could have been chaos into a demonstration of skill, patience, and dominance without ever raising his voice. Even the strongman, once full of arrogance and bravado, had no words. He had learned, in the most humbling way possible, that aggression alone does not define power. His pride was bruised, his ego wounded, but the lesson was unforgettable. The one who acts with restraint, strategy, and precision is the one truly in control. Engagement question. Have you ever underestimated someone quiet or calm, only to realize later they were the most capable person in the room? How did it change the way you view strength? Stephen finally turned his gaze away from the strongman, scanning the yard one last time. Every eye followed him, even for a moment longer than necessary. Respect radiated from the witnesses, not out of fear, but because of admiration. The calmness, the discipline, and the mastery he displayed spoke to something deeper than brute force. That day, a simple act of self-control left a lasting impression. People didn't share it for shock value. They shared it because it was a lesson in what real strength looks like, something rarely seen, even in a place built on intimidation and violence. In that moment, the moral was clear. Power without discipline can destroy. Discipline without aggression can inspire. Seagal had shown the world that day that you don't need to strike hard or shout loud to command authority. Sometimes, the quietest, most composed person in the room is also the strongest. Final engagement prompt. If you believe real strength is discipline, not rage, type respect in the comments. Would you have had the courage to stand your ground in that yard? Could you stay calm when everyone expects chaos? Share your thoughts below. By the next morning, the story had spread beyond the prison walls. Videos circulated online. People discussed it, analyzed it, and drew lessons from it. It wasn't about who won a fight. It was about the lesson in control, discipline, and strategic mastery. That night had proven something unforgettable. The true measure of strength is not how fast you strike, but how well you command the moment. And in the prison yard, long after the strongman had slunk away, the lesson lingered. Every person who had witnessed it understood that control is power, patience is authority, and discipline is the ultimate weapon. The yard returned to its normal noise, its ordinary rhythm, but it would never feel the same again.